What's going on, guys? It's the Unhinged Engineer here, back with episode 22, a very special episode of our grad school vlog. Today, I will be reviewing the course I took for my summer semester, CS 7632, Video Game AI. So just got back from the beach, summer semester is coming to a close here, and I think it's a really good time to kind of reflect on the class, some of the good, the bad, and the ugly, and just kind of overall talk about what I thought of it, what I got out of it, ways it could be improved, and whether or not you should take it as part of your degree program at Georgia Tech. I'm the Unhinged Engineer, like I said in the beginning. I make professional development content for young engineers like me. If that's something you're interested in, or you're interested in more content about the Georgia Tech OMSCS program, I vlog my grad school journey weekly, and the next class I'm going to be taking is computational photography. I don't remember the number for it right now. But in any case, if any of that stuff interests you, please like, comment, subscribe. Without further ado, let's get right into our review of Game AI. So I'm going to structure this pretty similarly to what I did for the last class I took, which was AI Techniques for Robotics. We're going to go through the content, then we're going to talk a little bit about the assignment, and then my overall review of the course. First, like what we learned, what we had to do based on what we learned, and then overall opinions about the class. Coming to a close with an actual score out of 10. I'm going to try to do my best to have an accurate score of how valuable these classes were, how much I enjoyed taking them, and hopefully the scores don't inflate over time. But let's start with the content. So one thing I will say about this class kind of early is that there was a ton of content in it, right? Tons of different lectures, hours and hours and hours, not all of which were relevant to all the assignments, which is something I'll get into towards the end of the review. But I kind of have separated into the modules the same way they're separated on Canvas. There's basic agent movement, which is basically just an introduction. Moving into computational geometry, a lot of really interesting stuff about how you draw game terrain, how you discretize it. You can represent it in different ways for different pathfinding algorithms or other kinds of autonomy. And that's why these three assignments here, plus actually A star I have down a little bit lower, were all kind of part of the computational geometry section. And also lots of additional content about floating point precision and other interesting parts of how games work in terms of their geometry and how stuff. From there, steering behaviors, so more complicated models of motion, right? So the actual agent movement part of the class. That kind of segues to projectile motion, right? So now we have our multiple agents, one of which is the player. They're all shooting at each other. How do we calculate trajectories and ballistics and whatnot for the different projectiles that are going on? Then they pivot back a little bit to coordinated movement, which is you have multiple agents coordinating between one another, whether that's flocking behavior or covering certain parts of an area. How do you program, again, several AI agents in a video game to do something like that? A star is obviously path planning. I think it might actually have been considered a computational geometry assignment for the class. I can't really remember. But again, it's about once we have these representations of game space, how do we actually traverse throughout it? This kind of line, which I think is roughly 50% of the course, don't quote me on that. There's kind of a tone shift where the beginning here is really about motion. And then the second part here is about decision making, right? With the exception of PCG is kind of somewhere in the middle because it's kind of like making decisions and learning certain parameters about the terrain you're trying to have things traverse. But overall, I would say that the beginning of this class is very geared towards motion, geometry, projectiles, the different moving bodies within a game, some of which are autonomous, others are not. And then the second part is for those autonomous agents, how do we actually give them a brain so that they can act within these environments intelligently? And so moving on to that part of the class, there's the decision-making module, which gets into fuzzy logic, finite state machines, also decision trees. I don't have them there because there's no assignment for decision trees, but these different kinds of decision-making models, learning certain parameters of certain models, right? Especially with decision trees, even getting into Q-learning and reinforcement learning techniques. And then last but not least, procedural content generation. Lots of different kinds of stuff there, like constraint propagation, which is interesting for Sudoku boards. There's certain rules that you need to use to generate a Sudoku board, otherwise it's invalid. Constraint propagation and also Perlin noise, which is kind of like a way of using layered noise signals to generate natural looking terrain. And that's what the assignment was. So, if that sounded like a ramble, that's because it was. There was lots of content to go through, and this is kind of how it's separated into assignments. Again, these three being about computational geometry, a little bit about shooting projectiles, moving throughout terrain, and then decision making, followed by, last but not least, this procedural content generation assignment, which I will say was not an extra credit assignment, but it was definitely like pretty easy. You don't actually write any code. But I think that was kind of just like a nice way to end the class on a good note, do something creative. It was very fun. But yeah, here you can see there are 8 assignments, and each of those is worth, if I remember correctly, 10% of your grade, so 80 total. Majority of your grade is assignments, aka projects, as they should be. And then the other 20% is quizzes, which again kind of straddle these different topics. Some of them are about, nav mesh and path networks. Some of them are about projectiles and coordinated movement, but then path planning might be a different part. The quizzes are kind of all over the place, scattered throughout all of the lectures. And I will say, even though the assignments are definitely a subset of all the things that you do in lectures, the quizzes cover almost everything. Not all of it, but like a much larger percentage of the material. And I'll talk about that in my review of the class towards the end. But yeah, quizzes comprise the remaining 20%. They are not distributed uniformly. Certain quizzes are worth more or less than others. But like just as an example, the learning module didn't really have any assignment associated with it, except for the quiz. And that quiz is weighed pretty heavily. So you gotta be careful to not just study the assignments you're gonna have to do, which is something I definitely was guilty of doing at several points in the course. So yeah, overall, mostly assignment weighted, but with some quizzes in there. Again, it appears that there's some kind of stipulation that all the classes have to have a exam type assessment, but there was no final actually, so I pretty much got this entire last week off, which is pretty nice. So last week off, a couple more weeks for the break in between semesters, and then we're back at it again with computation and time. So overall, that's the synopsis of the content we go through and the assignments associated with them, including quizzes. Now let's get into my review of the course. So what did I think? From this point forward, we're shifting from like objective to subjective. This is my opinion. Let's start off with the good things about this class, which I do think there were lots of good things. For one, I'm gonna call these the Comp Geo assignments. Okay, Comp Geo assignments, I'm mainly referring to these here, also probably a star. These assignments I think were really interesting. And the reason I say that is because they're very visual. You're working within set environments that they provide you ahead of time. I'll get to that in the next bullet here. You're working within set environments that they provide you ahead of time, and you basically have to execute on the algorithms that they teach you in the course, right? So grid lattice is really just separating terrain into a grid. The real catch with that is, how do you determine which cells of your grid are occupied by an obstacle or whatnot, and which aren't? Because obviously those aren't gonna always line up like super perfectly. Sometimes you have jagged edges that only include parts or corners of certain squares. So that's grid lattice. Path networks are basically just putting a bunch of points across the terrain and connecting them, right? So you have a graph with edges and nodes. And again, the question there with obstacles is, how do I make sure I only draw traversable edges? So I don't want the agent to assume it can walk through a wall when there's actually an obstacle there and it shouldn't be going. Nav mesh is pretty similarly, it's kind of like a blend of the two, which makes them interesting. It's similar to the grid lattice where you have areas of the map that are deemed traversable or not traversable, but also similar to the network in that you define nodes and edges between them so that not everything's a square. In any case, A star, pretty standard pathfinding. Once you have these methods of representing your geometry. So I would say these assignments were really, really strong, really illustrated the concepts, which I was not familiar with at all, in a very visual and very tangible way. These assignments later on, I'm especially referring to the fuzzy logic and the finite state machine, I think they were fine. I do think they're useful. I think they're good, and they're a good introduction to the topics, but I don't feel like I came away from these assignments with a really deep understanding of the decision-making model we were asked to implement, right? And that's because there's a lot more buttressing they provide you in terms of how your model actually runs. Which again, I understand from a practicality standpoint, they don't want us to implement, finite state machine logic like entirely ourselves from scratch. That would be a lot to ask of someone in a week. And I should say, at least for the summer class, pretty much each of these is given a week in the course. So I understand that. I don't want to, ask for more work, but I definitely think these were a strong point of the course in terms of assignments, and these are just fine. The next one I want to talk about is working environment. And I'm really referring to Unity and C# here. So I will say here, first of all, I had never written a lick of C# code before this class. Never written any. I've written C and C++, but never C#, and I definitely had never worked in Unity. In fact, I never even worked in a game engine at all. And I would say the general working environment, workflow of the assignment, I think is really well set up, and the experience of working in a game engine is something I'd never done before, and I definitely am glad I have at this point, right? I think it taught me lots of relevant skills, especially relevant to like modeling and simulation, relevant to what I do in aerospace. I think that this experience of working in the Unity game engine is an incredibly useful experience to have. And this is coming from someone who does not work in the video game industry. I can only imagine if you're trying to break into the video game industry and you've never worked in a game engine, period. This is a really cool way to kind of get an introduction to that, right? And that's obviously a relevant skill. Because they basically give you a Unity project template that has all the visualizations and the different environments and the agents and whatnot that you need to actually play, quote unquote, play your game, which again, for a lot of these is simulating your game. And then you're asked to implement specific C# scripts that are utilized in that Unity project. And again, just because I didn't implement everything myself from scratch, like I still think I definitely got a lot of value out of plugging into a larger project ecosystem there. So that was very cool. Next thing I want to talk about is the vibes, for lack of a better term. In the last class I reviewed, the robotics class, I said that the instructors and the students were really great. They were really great in this class. But in addition to that, I do want to say like the vibe of the course overall was pretty great. I mean, it was pretty laid back. It was a fun summer class. People were joking around in the Discord and in the edX. Also, there was lots of extra credit opportunities, especially with the finite state machine prison dodgeball tournaments that students were competing in and trying to see who get the best score for extra credit. I did not participate in that, but still seeing everybody else do that was pretty fun. Also was a nice break for us slackers who weren't actually going for the extra credit. We have to sit back and get a week to kind of take a breather, about halfway through the course, I should say, and watch other people compete with each other. So that was pretty fun. Yeah, I think overall the quote-unquote vibe of this class is really great, and it's especially great if you are just looking for something a little bit more laid back, a little bit easier, which I'll talk about that more towards the end of the class. If you're looking for something with that kind of feel, this is definitely a great class for you. The last thing I want to put here, I'm kind of going to put like in the middle between good and bad, and that's extra content. So there were hours and hours and hours of lecture content in all of these modules. The lectures were pretty slow paced. They went off into lots of like adjacent topics or real world implementations, like pulling source material from Doom and Quake and other games. There was lots of extra material here. And as somebody who's casually into video games, like I play video games but I never made one, as somebody who's casually into them, it was pretty interesting. It was cool. I do honestly wish I had a little more time and mental bandwidth to actually sink my teeth in all that content, because there was a lot. And if you're really trying to nerd out about AI agents in games, then there is tons of meat for you to chew on in this course, in the lecture content. I also kind of consider it a downside because it makes it harder to distinguish signal from noise. And those profiles are very different for the assignments versus the quizzes, and then different for each of the modules. Like it's really hard to keep track of, okay, what do I really need to watch and understand at a deep level in order to actually accomplish the assignments, get a good grade. It kind of made that more difficult, which was a little frustrating. I'll be honest here, there was lots of content I just wanted to skip it because I didn't have the time or I wasn't that interested. So that kind of feeds into my first complaint about the class, is it's just pretty disorganized. Now again, I don't want to spend the whole time comparing it to the last one I've taken, but at the end of the day, this is my subjective experience and this is the second class I've ever taken. So I only have 2 data. And the robotics class was super well organized. I felt like I was in basic training for the military or something. It's just kind of week to week to week to week. Like you know what's going on, you know what you gotta watch, you know what you gotta read, you know what you gotta do, you know what you gotta prep for. It was much easier to keep track of what's going on and what you need to get done. And then in addition to that, all the extra stuff that they provided. With this course, between the vast amount of extra content, the not one-to-one of assignments to modules. So certain modules had more assignments or less assignments than others, versus the quizzes, pretty much every module had a quiz. So now it's like, you don't know what you really need to know for now versus know for later with the quizzes, because the quizzes are all due at one point towards the end of the class versus the assignments are due on a weekly basis. Everything's kind of all over the place. It's a lot less like trackable in that regard. So, you know, at the end of the day, if you just gotta take the onus on yourself and get a read through Canvas and make sure that you know what's going on. It's a little bit more mental load there. It's not laid out for you very easily like the Yellowbird Road. Speaking of Canvas, the Canvas was also pretty poorly organized in my opinion. Files flying all over the place. Again, like this is all nitpicky stuff. It's not like a huge deal, but it definitely did make it harder to just keep track of what's going on between the Canvas pages and the edX and Gradescope and all this stuff. It's just a lot. And so be prepared to have to kind of keep track of what's going on pretty diligently. The next thing I want to talk about here is the quizzes, and this one is pretty much my same take as from the last class. They just felt superficial. I felt like the projects, even these I mentioned here, just kind of being sufficient. These were sufficient, these were great. All the assignments I feel like drove home the concepts really well, and I feel like they could have added more to these assignments. Maybe like an assignment on learning mechanisms or decision trees, or something interesting with flocking behavior. Flocking behavior has a special place in my heart. It's one of the first personal projects I ever did. Lots of additional opportunities, and I just feel like the quizzes, again, don't really teach me anything. And this is my own opinion, but I feel like quizzes and assessments should teach you. They should push you to remember and reinforce those concepts in the moment. I don't think that a quiz suggests a litmus test of do you remember stuff or do you don't. And the quizzes really just felt like checking a box. So a little bit superficial. The one thing that I'm gonna put in the ugly category, not really because it was awful and ruined the whole class experience, but just because it's such an opportunity to make it a lot better and help those vibes that we're talking about that were already good, was the Gradescope setup. The Gradescope setup was pretty strange here. Basically, you had 2 submissions, and for the majority of the assignments, it was the average of those 2, assuming that all the scores that you provide were over 70. So any score under 70 is regarded, and then the other 2 that you put in, you get the average of those 2. So if you get like an 80 and 100, or let's say 80, 60, 100, just as an example. The 80 is registered, the 60 is discarded because it's less than 70, and the 100 is registered, so your final grade will be 90. That system, combined with the weird due dates where it's due Sunday anytime on earth, which is really Monday at 8 a.m., but then you get a grace period, which is Tuesday at 8 a.m., so 24 hours after that. But then on some things you don't get the grace period, but some things you do. Again, it's just weird. I don't know why you don't just have a due date and then have them be able to give as many submissions as they want. Yeah, the Gradescope setup was just pretty weird. I would completely overhaul it. But again, the assignments themselves were really, really great. It's just actually pushing it over the line in Gradescope was pretty frustrating. It didn't really add a lot of value, just friction there. So yeah, that's kind of my good, bad, and ugly here for the class overall. Now, before I get into my final score I'm going to give the class, I do want to point out one very important piece of context. I probably should have done this at the beginning. I took this class kind of as a lighter, more fun course to take during the summer because I had a lot of personal things going on, starting a new job, moving somewhere, lots of personal things in addition to that. And so I kind of just wanted something to like chill out. I wanted something to chill out, but I also wanted something that was a little bit relevant and a little bit interesting and have some fun, not just completely throw away the summer and do like busy work, getting no value out of it except for credits. That was kind of why I sought out Game AI. It's listed as kind of a lighter workload course on OMS Hub, and it definitely lived up to that. And that was kind of my expectation going into it. And one word of warning I'll provide to anybody else who does this is, it's easy to forget that you came in looking for that kind of experience and then get frustrated that you're not getting more out. Now, I would have weeks where my life was crazy, and I'd be like, oh, thank God I'm in Game AI. It's pretty laid back, instructors are understanding. Then there'd be other weeks where I have lots of free time, and I'm like, damn it, I don't have as much work to do. I'm not learning as much. I'm not getting cool projects to put in my portfolio and stuff like that. This is a waste of time. It's very easy to forget the expectations you went into the course with when you're in the moment, and then even at the end, as I have been trying to come up with a score. So I'm gonna score this with that context in mind, because I think it would be unfair to do it in any other way. And without any more beating around the bush, I'm gonna give this course a 6.5 out of 10. I think there will be several better courses that I take throughout this program. I do think that the robotics course I took, for me, was better. I enjoyed it a lot more. I also think there will be classes that are worse than this. Either A, they're valuable and technically challenging, but they're really frustrating, the instructors don't run it well, and it's a pain in the ass. Or B, it's not challenging at all, and I don't get anything out of it, and it's just busy work. I think if you go into this with the expectation of, it's a video game class, it's pretty fun, it's one of several video game / animation classes that are available to you, I'm gonna take this just as like an interesting and fun way to get some exposure to video games, which are fun, get some exposure to AI techniques, which are important these days and desirable, and yeah, just not kill myself for this semester. If that's what you're going into this class with, I 100% think it delivers on that front. If you're going into it trying to become like a cutting edge AI expert, work at Anthropic, maybe not. That's kind of my overall take on the class. Definitely glad I took it. Definitely recommend it to anybody who's interested, even remotely like I was, or if you're extremely interested in this, I would for sure recommend you take it. So overall, 6.5 out of 10. And yeah, that pretty much wraps up my review of my summer course, Video Game AI. So again, to reiterate, really enjoyed it. Definitely glad I got to share this journey with you guys, and incredibly excited for computational photography next semester. So definitely gonna be more challenging, probably gonna be more frustrating, a little bit more relevant to my day job, which I definitely think is important because part of the dissonance here is that I'm not trying to be a video game developer. Really, really excited about computational photography and excited to share that journey with y'all, as I've been doing basically since I started the program. That's basically it for me. Like I said in the beginning of the video, I'm the Unhinged Engineer. I make professional development content for young STEM professionals or engineers like myself. Usually I dress a little bit more formally, but I figured I'd enjoy the summer weather. And yeah, if you're interested in advancing your career, in doing the Georgia Tech program at night like I am, if you're interested in any of these experiences that young people like us might be going through in this crazy thing we call engineering, then definitely like, comment, and subscribe. I will see you guys in the next episode.